The horses noticed a crying boy at the roadside, and what happened next left everyone speechless. The autumn wind whispered through the maple trees lining Old Mill Road in Chester County, Pennsylvania, carrying with it the first hints of the coming winter. At Cedar Creek Farm, where split-rail fences traced the gentle rolls of the landscape, 3 horses stood alert in the falling dusk. Their ears pricked forward in unison, catching a sound that didn't belong among the usual evening symphony of crickets and distant traffic. Dakota, the eldest of the 3 at 23, was a chestnut quarter horse whose face had grown white with age. His eyes, though, remained bright and knowing beneath his distinctive white blaze. Beside him grazed Luna, a dapple gray Arabian mare whose delicate features belied her strength of spirit. The youngest of the trio, Thunder, a muscular black Frisian gelding still growing into his massive hooves, stopped his grazing to stare intently down the road. What caught their attention was the sound of human suffering, raw, uncontained sobbing that seemed to emerge from a small figure huddled against the fence post where Old Mill Road curved past the farm's eastern pasture. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, though grief had a way of making children appear smaller, more fragile. His navy blue school uniform was smudged with dirt and grass stains, his backpack lying forgotten beside him like a dejected guardian. Luna was the first to move, her silvery coat catching the late afternoon sun as she stepped closer to the fence. She moved with the fluid grace that Arabians were known for, but there was something more in her movement, a purpose, an understanding that transcended ordinary horse behavior. Dakota and Thunder followed, creating a protective semicircle around the distressed child. The boy, Marcus Wheeler was his name, had walked 4 miles from Chester Valley Middle School, though he'd had no destination in mind when he'd started walking. His father, James Wheeler, would be working late again at the Stevenson manufacturing plant, unaware that his son had missed the bus home. These long walks had become Marcus's way of postponing his return to an empty house that still echoed with his mother's absence. Sarah Wheeler had passed away 6 months earlier, in the middle of a warm April night, after an 18-month battle with ovarian cancer. She had fought hard, determined to see her only child graduate elementary school. She had managed that, attending the ceremony in a wheelchair, her smile radiant despite her pallor. 2 weeks later, she was gone, leaving behind a husband who buried himself in work to escape his grief, and a son who was desperately trying to hold on to every memory of her he could. Today had been Parents' Day at school, an annual tradition that Marcus had once looked forward to. His mother had always taken the day off work, arriving with homemade cookies for the class and wearing one of her colorful scarves that somehow made her look more like an artist than the accountant she was. This year, Marcus had sat alone, the empty chair beside him a glaring reminder of all he had lost. His father had tried to get the day off, but the plant was behind on orders, and as the floor supervisor, he couldn't afford to take the time. Luna's soft nicker broke through Marcus's sobs. He looked up, startled by how close the horses had come. The Arabian mare's gray coat had darkened with the approaching evening, but her eyes seemed to glow with gentle intelligence. She stretched her elegant neck over the fence, her nostrils flaring slightly as she took in his scent. "Go away," Marcus mumbled, his voice hoarse from crying. But even as he said it, he found himself drawn to the mare's steady presence. His mother had loved horses. There had been a whole shelf in their living room dedicated to the porcelain horse figurines she collected. She used to tell him stories about growing up in Kentucky, where her family had owned a small farm. "Horses," she would say, "have a way of healing hearts without ever saying a word." From the window of the farmhouse's cozy kitchen, Elizabeth Morgan watched the scene unfold, while her hands automatically went through the motions of kneading bread dough. At 68, she had owned Cedar Creek Farm for 43 years, turning it from a struggling horse boarding facility into something much more meaningful, a place of healing for both horses and humans. Elizabeth had come to understand the therapeutic power of horses through her own loss. When her husband Robert died suddenly of a heart attack 15 years ago, it was her horses that had given her a reason to get up each morning. Watching Luna with the crying boy stirred something in her memory. The way the mare had been when she first arrived at Cedar Creek Farm 3 years ago. Luna had come to them from a prestigious breeding farm in Virginia, where she had lost her first and only foal due to complications during birth. The mare had fallen into such a deep depression that her owners, more concerned with their breeding program success rates than the emotional well-being of their horses, had decided to sell her. Elizabeth had heard about Luna through the network of therapeutic riding instructors she'd built over the years, and something in the mare's story called to her. When Luna first arrived at Cedar Creek, she would stand in the corner of her paddock, refusing to interact with other horses or humans. It took months of patient care before she showed any interest in life again. The turning point came when Amy Sullivan, a nonverbal 8-year-old with autism, visited the farm with her therapeutic riding group. Something about the child's silence seemed to resonate with Luna, and from that day forward, the mare appointed herself Amy's personal protector. Elizabeth watched now as Luna worked her gentle magic on another wounded soul. The mare had positioned herself so that the boy would have to reach up slightly to touch her, making any contact his choice rather than an intrusion into his space. Dakota and Thunder stood guard nearby, their presence somehow making the scene feel more intimate rather than crowded. Wiping her hands on her apron, Elizabeth called to her border collie, Scout. The dog, who had been dozing in a patch of sunlight, immediately perked up. "Come on, old friend," she said softly. "I think we're needed." As Elizabeth made her way down the porch steps, her mind was already working through the logistics of what might come next. She'd seen enough troubled children over the years to recognize the signs of deep grief, and something told her this boy's appearance at her fence line wasn't mere coincidence. Her husband Robert had always said there were no accidents when it came to horses and healing hearts. The gravel crunched under her boots as she approached, Scout trotting faithfully beside her. The boy quickly tried to wipe his face with his sleeve, though there was no hiding the evidence of his breakdown. Close, Elizabeth could see that his school uniform bore the crest of Chester Valley Middle School, the same school where she'd given a presentation about therapeutic riding just last month. "Those horses seem to have taken quite an interest in you," Elizabeth said warmly, keeping her distance so as not to crowd him. "Especially Luna there. She's usually pretty particular about who she makes friends with." Marcus looked up at her, then back at the mare who was still watching him intently. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to bother them, or trespass. His voice cracked slightly, and he swallowed hard. "Needed a place to stop for a while," Elizabeth finished gently. When the boy nodded, she continued, "Well, you couldn't have picked a better spot. Luna here has a special way of knowing when someone needs a friend. Would you like to meet her properly? She seems quite determined to make your acquaintance." The boy hesitated, and Elizabeth could see him working through the warnings about strangers that had surely been drilled into him. Scout chose that moment to wag his tail and offer a friendly bark, which seemed to ease some of the tension in Marcus's shoulders. I should probably get home," he said, though he made no move to leave. "My dad will be wondering where I am." Elizabeth noted how he didn't reach for his phone to check for messages. "Would you like to use my phone to call him? We could let him know you're safe while you help me with the evening feeding. These three are worse than teenagers when their dinner's late." The ghost of a smile flickered across Marcus's face. "I've never fed horses before," he admitted. "There's a first time for everything," Elizabeth smiled, opening the gate. "I'm Elizabeth Morgan, by the way, but most folks around here just call me Ms. Beth. And you've already met Luna, Dakota, and Thunder." As they walked toward the barn, Elizabeth kept up a steady stream of casual conversation, noting how the boy relaxed slightly when the focus wasn't directly on him. She learned that his name was Marcus Wheeler, that he lived in the new development off Route 30, and that he was in 7th grade at Chester Valley. She also learned, in the way he carefully avoided certain topics, that there were deep wounds still too fresh to talk about. The barn was a cathedral of sweet hay and warm wood, with shafts of evening light streaming through the high windows. The familiar sounds of horses shuffling in their stalls and the smell of fresh shavings seemed to have a calming effect on Marcus. Luna followed them in, taking up position outside her stall as if she knew she would be needed. "First rule of horsemanship," Elizabeth said as she showed Marcus to the feed room, "is that you always put their needs before your own. Horses are creatures of routine, and they depend on us to maintain that routine. She demonstrated how to measure out the grain, explaining the different requirements for each horse based on their age, work level, and individual needs. As they worked, Marcus gradually began to open up. Elizabeth learned about his mother's death, about his father's struggle to keep their little family functioning, about the loneliness of coming home to an empty house each day. She heard about Sarah Wheeler's love of horses and her unfulfilled promise to teach Marcus to ride someday. "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Elizabeth said softly as they filled water buckets. "I bet she would have loved this place." Marcus nodded, blinking back tears. "She collected horse figurines," he said. "Dad packed them away after she died. He said it was too hard to look at them." Elizabeth understood that kind of grief, the kind that made even beautiful memories painful. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "when we lose someone we love, it feels like we have to pack away all the things that remind us of them. But in my experience, those are exactly the things we need to hold on to. They help us remember not just that we lost someone, but that we were blessed to have them in the first place." As they finished the evening chores, Elizabeth couldn't help but notice how naturally Marcus took to working with the horses. He was careful and methodical, paying attention to detail and asking intelligent questions. Luna stayed close by, occasionally reaching out to touch him with her soft muzzle, as if encouraging him. The sun was setting by the time they finished, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Elizabeth insisted on driving Marcus home, knowing it wasn't safe for him to walk back in the growing darkness. As they got into her old pickup truck, she made a decision. "You know," she said casually, "I run a youth program here at the farm. Kids come after school and on weekends to learn about horse care, riding, and responsibility. We could always use another helper, especially one who seems to have such a good way with horses." The hope that flashed across Marcus's face was quickly replaced by uncertainty. I don't know how to ride," he admitted. "And I don't have any way to get here after school." "Well, as for the riding, everyone starts somewhere. That's what lessons are for. And as for transportation, we already have a carpool system set up for other kids in town. I'm sure we could work something out with your father." They pulled up to a modest two-story house in one of the newer developments. A work truck was just turning into the driveway, James Wheeler returning home from his late shift. Elizabeth could see the worry on his face turn to relief when he spotted his son. The conversation that followed on the Wheelers' front porch was one Elizabeth had had many times before with different parents. She explained the youth program, its benefits, and the transformation she'd seen in countless children who had found healing through working with horses. She watched James Wheeler's expression shift from polite skepticism to cautious hope as she described how the program could provide Marcus with structure, purpose, and a healthy way to process his grief. "I can't afford expensive riding lessons," James said finally, his hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. Elizabeth smiled. "Our program operates on a volunteer basis," she explained. "The kids earn their riding lessons through helping with barn chores and assisting with our therapeutic riding programs. We find it teaches responsibility and builds character. Plus," she added with a wink at Marcus, "I think Luna has already decided your son belongs at Cedar Creek." That weekend, Marcus started his orientation at the farm. Elizabeth paired him with Katie Martinez, a 16-year-old volunteer who had been with the program for 3 years. Katie had her own story of healing at Cedar Creek. She'd come to them angry and withdrawn after her parents' bitter divorce, and working with the horses had helped her find her way back to herself. Under Katie's guidance, Marcus learned the basics of horse care: how to groom properly, pick hooves, lead horses safely, and recognize signs of health or distress. Luna supervised it all, standing patiently as Marcus practiced his grooming techniques, gently correcting him with a nudge when he missed a spot. The transformation began slowly but steadily. Elizabeth noticed how Marcus started holding his head higher, how his shoulders gradually lost their defensive hunch. He began staying after his assigned chores were done, asking questions about horse behavior and anatomy. Elizabeth would often find him in Luna's stall, talking softly to the mare as he practiced braiding her mane or simply leaning against her while reading a book. James Wheeler noticed the changes too. He started leaving work early on Wednesdays to watch Marcus's riding lessons, and Elizabeth would catch him smiling as his son demonstrated new skills. One Saturday morning, about 2 months after Marcus started at the farm, James approached Elizabeth with an unusual request. "I found Sarah's horse figurines in the attic," he said quietly. "I was thinking, maybe Marcus would like to bring them here? Set them up in the tack room or something?" The collection now sat in a glass cabinet in the barn's main aisle, where Marcus would often pause to adjust a figure or wipe away dust. Each piece seemed to hold a memory he was finally ready to share, and slowly, the stories of his mother began to flow more freely. The real breakthrough came during one of Amy Sullivan's therapy sessions. Marcus, now confident in his horse-handling skills, was leading Luna while Amy rode. The little girl, who had progressed from complete silence to speaking in short phrases, was having a difficult day. She wouldn't respond to her instructor's prompts and seemed on the verge of a meltdown. Marcus, drawing from his own experience with grief and anxiety, began talking softly to both Amy and Luna. He told Amy about his mom's horse figurines, about how Luna helped him when he was sad, about how it was okay to have bad days. Gradually, Amy's tension eased. By the end of the session, she was smiling again, reaching down to pat Luna's neck while Marcus praised them both. Elizabeth, watching from the arena gate, felt tears prick her eyes. This, she thought, was exactly what Cedar Creek Farm was meant to be, a place where healing hearts could help heal others. The holiday season brought new challenges and opportunities. The farm's annual Christmas party was a tradition that brought together current and former students, volunteers, and the families of their therapeutic riding clients. Elizabeth had worried that the festivities might be difficult for Marcus and his father, marking as they did the first Christmas without Sarah. But Marcus threw himself into the preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. He spent hours helping to decorate the barn, stringing lights and hanging wreaths. He seemed especially determined to make Luna's stall festive, weaving ribbons into her mane and decorating her door with extra care. When James arrived at the party, Elizabeth noticed he was carrying a small box wrapped in silver paper. Later, she saw Marcus unwrap it. Inside was a new horse figurine, a dapple gray Arabian that looked remarkably like Luna. The sight of father and son hugging in front of the collection cabinet, both crying but also smiling, told Elizabeth that healing was finally taking root. Spring came to Cedar Creek Farm, bringing with it new life and new possibilities. Marcus had progressed to advanced riding lessons, showing a natural seat and quiet hands that made Elizabeth think he might have inherited his mother's affinity for horses. He'd started talking about becoming a therapeutic riding instructor himself someday, and Elizabeth had no doubt he would excel at it. Luna, too, had bloomed in her role as Marcus's special friend and partner. The mare who had once lost her own foal had found a new purpose in nurturing this wounded boy back to joy. Together, they had begun helping other children who came to the farm bearing their own burdens of grief or anxiety or uncertainty. 1 year to the day after Luna first noticed a crying boy by the road, Elizabeth watched from her porch as Marcus led a new student to meet the dapple gray mare. The child, recently bereaved of a parent like Marcus had been, stood hesitant and withdrawn. But Luna, with her infinite patience and wisdom, stretched her neck over the fence and nickered softly, just as she had done that autumn afternoon that now seemed so long ago. Marcus looked up and caught Elizabeth's eye, sharing a knowing smile. They both understood that what had happened that day wasn't really shocking at all. It was miraculous in the quiet way that healing always is, a gentle reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come not from words, but from the silent understanding between a troubled heart and a gentle soul who knows exactly what it needs. As Marcus entered his teenage years, Cedar Creek Farm became more than just a place of healing. It became his second home. James Wheeler, who had once been too consumed by grief to notice his son's pain, now spent his Saturday mornings at the farm, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He'd started taking beginner riding lessons himself, much to Marcus's delight and occasional playful teasing. The father and son had developed a new tradition. Every Sunday after their barn chores, they would sit in the tack room together, sharing hot chocolate and stories about Sarah. The horse figurines that had once been too painful to look at now sparked conversations about happy memories. Sarah's failed attempts at baking horse-shaped cookies, her collection of horse-themed Christmas ornaments, the way she would hum while cleaning each porcelain piece. Luna remained the heart of their story. The mare seemed to understand the weight of her role in their lives, carrying it with the same grace she showed in everything else. She was particularly gentle with Marcus during the difficult days, his mother's birthday, the anniversary of her passing, or just those random moments when grief would surge unexpectedly like a wave. On one such day, during Marcus's freshman year of high school, Elizabeth found him in Luna's stall, his arms wrapped around the mare's neck. She was about to quietly withdraw when she heard him speaking softly to the horse. "I wish Mom could see me now," he was saying. "She always said horses were magic. I didn't really understand what she meant back then. But now I do. You're magic, Luna. Not the kind in fairy tales, but the real kind. The kind that helps broken things heal." The story of the horses who noticed a crying boy spread through their small Pennsylvania town, drawing more hurting souls to Cedar Creek Farm. Elizabeth had to expand her youth program to accommodate all the new participants, but she didn't mind. Marcus proved to be an invaluable help, especially with the newer children who arrived bearing their own burdens of loss or fear. He had a way of sharing his story that made others feel less alone in their pain. "It's okay to be sad," he would tell them, while demonstrating how to groom a horse or muck a stall. "But it's also okay to be happy again. The horses taught me that." By the time Marcus entered his sophomore year, he had become a certified therapeutic riding assistant, the youngest in the program's history. Elizabeth watched with pride as he worked with clients, showing the same patience and understanding that Luna had once shown him. The mare, now in her late teens but still elegant as ever, seemed equally proud of her protege. James Wheeler, too, had found his place in the Cedar Creek family. He started volunteering his mechanical skills to maintain the farm's equipment, and his presence became as much a part of the landscape as the old maple trees lining the driveway. The lines of grief on his face had softened, replaced by laugh lines earned during long days spent watching his son flourish. One spring morning, as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elizabeth stood at her kitchen window, watching Marcus lead Luna out to the pasture. The boy who had once sat crying by the roadside had grown into a confident young man, his shoulders straight, his steps sure. Luna walked beside him with her characteristic grace, their bond visible in every synchronized movement. They paused at the gate, and Elizabeth watched as Marcus pressed his forehead against Luna's, sharing a quiet moment before releasing her into the pasture. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, a daily renewal of the connection that had saved them both. The mare trotted a few steps away, then turned back to nicker softly at her human friend. Marcus laughed, a sound that still made Elizabeth's heart lift every time she heard it, remembering the broken child he had been. He said something to Luna that Elizabeth couldn't hear, then started walking back toward the barn, where new students would soon arrive for their morning lessons. As she watched him go, Elizabeth thought about all the lives that had been touched because 3 horses noticed a crying boy by the side of the road. Dakota, now retired but still dispensing wisdom from his private paddock. Thunder, who had grown into a gentle giant specializing in working with anxious riders. And Luna, whose own healing had enabled her to help heal others. The farm had grown too, adding new programs and reaching more people in need. But at its heart, Cedar Creek remained what it had always been, a place where broken spirits could mend, where grief could transform into growth, and where the simple act of a horse noticing a crying child could set in motion a chain of healing that would ripple out to touch countless lives. Sarah Wheeler's collection of horse figurines still stood in the glass cabinet in the barn aisle, but they were no longer just reminders of loss. They had become symbols of hope, each piece telling part of a larger story about love that transcends death, healing that comes in unexpected ways, and the profound connection between horses and humans that continues to transform lives at Cedar Creek Farm. And it all began because 3 horses, Dakota, Thunder, and especially Luna, noticed a boy crying by the side of the road and decided to do something about it. In the years since that autumn afternoon, countless other children had found their way to Cedar Creek's fence line, each carrying their own burden of grief or fear, or loneliness, and each time, just as they had done for Marcus, the horses noticed. They always would. For as Elizabeth often told new visitors to the farm, some things that appear shocking at first glance are really just love making itself known in unexpected ways. And sometimes, the most powerful healing comes not from grand gestures or carefully planned interventions, but from the simple act of being noticed by a creature who sees past our pain to the hope that lies beneath. Marcus Wheeler had learned this truth on a grief-stricken afternoon by an old fence line, and now he spent his days helping others learn it too. The crying boy had become a healer in his own right, turning his pain into purpose, his loss into legacy. And Luna, his faithful partner in this journey, continued to watch over it all with her gentle, knowing eyes, ready to notice the next hurting soul who might find their way to Cedar Creek Farm's healing embrace.